When the classroom emptied, I thought I'd be the last one there. But then I noticed, two women still sitting quietly, their eyes following me as if they'd been waiting all along. The last of the students filed out, the shuffle of shoes echoing against the tile floor until the hallway swallowed the sound. I lingered behind, half distracted as I stacked my notes and slid them into my bag. The room had that peculiar stillness that only comes after a crowd disperses, the faint scent of coffee cups abandoned on desks, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above, and the golden slant of sunlight slipping through tall windows. I thought I was alone. But when I looked up, I realized I wasn't. Near the front, two women still sat together, angled slightly toward one another, their heads bent close in conversation. Their voices were low, warm, almost like music, too soft to make out the words, yet distinct enough to remind me that this space wasn't entirely mine. For a moment, I hesitated. It felt strangely intimate, being the only other person in the room with them. I considered leaving quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed, but something about the way they carried themselves held me still. They weren't just any students. They had a kind of presence that set them apart, a quiet confidence, as if they didn't need the approval or noise of the crowd that had just rushed out. One of them leaned back casually in her chair, her posture open and relaxed, like she was at ease with being seen. The other sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her, chin tilted slightly as she listened, her eyes carrying a reflective calm. The light caught them in different ways, one's hair glinting with warm auburn tones, the other's showing soft streaks of silver woven delicately into darker strands. Not the kind of detail you notice when surrounded by 30 other voices, but here, in this silence, it was impossible not to. I busied myself with pointless tasks, zipping and unzipping my bag, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Still, I felt their presence, the way their voices shaped the air, the faint rise and fall of laughter now and then. And then, a curious thing happened. Instead of leaving, they stayed. Minutes passed. Chairs scraped faintly as they shifted, but neither woman made a move toward the door. It struck me that maybe they were waiting, not for time to pass, but for something else. The silence between us stretched. I could hear the faint tapping of a pen against the desk, the soft sigh of a page being turned. Their calm was magnetic, in a way I couldn't quite name. I told myself not to stare, but every time I glanced up, I found myself caught by the smallest details, the graceful curve of a hand resting against a notebook, the way one of them tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet patience in the other's eyes. It was only then that I realized, I wasn't simply sharing a classroom with them. I was caught inside their orbit. And in that unexpected stillness, surrounded by sunlight, silence, and two women who hadn't yet left, the ordinary room felt different. As if something was about to begin. I had just convinced myself it was time to leave, slip out quietly, let them finish whatever private conversation kept them here. But before I could move, one of them looked up. Her eyes found mine with a steadiness that made my breath catch. She tilted her head, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then, in a voice warm and assured, she called out, "You. Why don't you come here for a moment?" It wasn't a demand, not exactly. More like an invitation dressed in confidence. And before I even thought of refusing, my feet were carrying me forward. The scrape of her chair against the floor as she turned toward me filled the silence. She shifted in her seat, her posture relaxed, one arm resting along the desk as if she had been expecting this all along. The faint scent of her perfume reached me first, something subtle, floral, with just enough sharpness to linger. Beside her, the other woman said nothing. She didn't call out or gesture. She just watched. Her gaze was quieter, almost contemplative, as though she were studying not just me, but the space between us. Where her friend's energy was bold and inviting, hers carried a different weight, calm, reserved, but no less powerful. I stopped near the front row, suddenly hyper-aware of everything about myself, the way my bag strap cut across my shoulder, the scuff on my shoes, the nervous set of my mouth. "You always sit near the back," the bolder one said, smiling as if she'd caught me in a secret. Do you prefer distance, or do you just like hiding from the rest of us? Her tone was teasing, but her eyes searched me as though she really wanted to know. I gave a half smile, shrugging. Maybe a little of both. That drew a laugh from her, light, confident, the kind of sound that fills a room without trying. She leaned forward slightly, her elbow on the desk, and her fingers brushed the edge of her notebook as if they needed something to do. Meanwhile, the quieter woman tilted her head, still studying me. She hadn't spoken yet, but there was a softness in her gaze that unsettled me in a different way. It was as though she saw through the easy answer I had given and into the hesitation I hadn't admitted. I glanced between them, unsure which unsettled me more, the woman who drew me closer with her playful daring, or the one who held me still with her silence. For a moment, I wished the rest of the class were still here, the chatter, the noise, the distraction of too many people. Because here, under their attention, I felt exposed. But at the same time, I didn't move. The warmth of their presence pressed in on me, one smiling, amused, and reaching outward, the other silent and steady, waiting with patience that felt almost heavier than words. And I realized, standing in the glow of the late sun, that I wasn't being dismissed or ignored. I was being drawn in. "Sit," the bolder woman said, patting the empty chair beside her as if it had been waiting for me all along. I hesitated, not out of reluctance, but because the moment felt weighted. The classroom, once just a place for lectures and routine, now seemed transformed. It was no longer rows of desks and scribbled notes, it was a smaller world, defined by the attention of two women who had not yet let me go. Still, I pulled the chair closer, the legs scraping softly against the tile. The sound echoed in the quiet room, marking the shift. I was no longer standing apart, I was stepping into their space. The chair fit snugly between theirs, and suddenly, I was surrounded. Their presence pressed in gently, not suffocating, but inescapable. On my left, the bolder one leaned slightly toward me, her posture open, a half smile on her lips as if she were amused by my awkwardness. On my right, the quieter woman angled her body just enough to face me, her folded hands resting neatly on the desk, her eyes calm but intent. The closeness brought new details to life. I noticed the faint brush of fabric as the edge of her sleeve brushed against my arm when she shifted. I caught the scent of coffee on their breath, a hint of perfume layered over something more grounded, skin, warmth, presence. My heart beat a little too fast, as if my body hadn't yet caught up with the fact that this was simply a conversation. "So," the bolder woman began, tilting her head, "what do you really think about all this?" "All this?" I asked, trying not to smile at the vague question. "Class. Life. The things we talk about, and the things we don't." It was the kind of question that might have seemed careless, even playful, if not for the way she leaned forward, her elbow on the desk, eyes fixed on mine with sharp curiosity. Before I could answer, the quieter one finally spoke. She likes asking questions with no easy answers. Her voice was softer than I expected, low and thoughtful. Then, after a pause, she added, "But I'd like to hear what you think too." There it was again, that difference between them. One pulling me in with energy and teasing, the other drawing me in with patience, giving me space to reveal more than I meant to. I found myself speaking without quite planning the words. About why I stayed quiet in class, how I preferred to listen before deciding if I had anything worth saying. How I sometimes felt like the best parts of learning happened after the noise faded. As I spoke, they leaned closer, not in exaggeration, but just enough that I could feel it. A shift of posture, the slight angling of their knees toward mine, the warmth of nearness that erased the space between strangers. And when I finally stopped talking, there was no awkward silence. Just the soft sound of a pen being set aside, the brush of fabric as one of them shifted closer, and the unmistakable sense that the circle had closed. I wasn't just part of the class anymore. I was part of their moment. The conversation meandered in small circles at first, questions about assignments, stray thoughts about the lecture, casual remarks about the weather. But underneath it, there was something else. Something that lived in the way they looked at me, the way their bodies angled closer even when the words themselves seemed harmless. The bolder woman broke the surface first. She laughed at something I said, not a loud laugh, but one that carried a ripple of warmth through the room. As she did, her hand lifted almost without thought, brushing against my arm. Just the lightest touch, fingertips grazing the fabric of my sleeve before resting there for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It shouldn't have meant much, a casual gesture, easily explained away. But the effect it had on me was disproportionate. I felt the heat of it, the way her touch claimed space in a place I hadn't realized was empty. My chest tightened, not with discomfort, but with the startling awareness that this wasn't just small talk anymore. "You're more thoughtful than you let on," she said, her smile curving as if she had discovered a secret. "I can see it in your eyes, even when you try to stay quiet." Her words left me uncertain, flattered, but exposed. Before I could respond, the quieter woman finally stirred. She had been watching, her gaze steady and unbroken, but now she leaned forward slightly, folding her hands as though preparing to speak something more difficult. "I stay after sometimes," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "Not because of the assignments. Not really. I stay because, it's easier when the room is empty. The world feels too loud most of the time." Her words landed gently, but they carried weight. She wasn't teasing, wasn't performing, she was confessing. And though her tone was calm, I sensed the vulnerability beneath it, the admission of something she rarely shared aloud. Her eyes flicked toward mine, holding me there, waiting to see if I understood. And I did. More than I wanted to admit, I did. I nodded slowly, my voice softer than I expected when I replied. "I know what you mean. The quiet makes space for things you can't always say when everyone else is around." For a moment, the air stilled. The bolder woman's hand still rested lightly on my arm, grounding me with her warmth and playfulness, while the quieter one's gaze tethered me in another way entirely, steady, searching, almost tender. The contrast between them was impossible to ignore. One drew laughter and sparks, the thrill of being seen in ways that surprised me. The other invited depth, the safety of being understood without having to perform. And there I sat, caught between them, not by choice, but by the undeniable pull of two different kinds of gravity. In their glances, in their words, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about staying late after class. This was about something unspoken, something neither of them, nor I, had dared to name just yet. But we all felt it. The classroom had begun to change without us noticing. The sunlight that had once poured through the tall windows now thinned into a softer glow, streaks of orange and fading gold stretching across the walls. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt louder in the stillness, but no one reached to turn them on. The three of us simply remained, suspended in that twilight space between day and night. We were no longer talking about the lecture, or even about anything practical. Our words had slowed into something else, fragments of thought, short stories from life outside this room, things you might only say when you're not afraid of silence filling in the gaps. But it wasn't the words that carried the weight. It was the pauses. The way the bolder woman leaned in when I spoke, her hand brushing my sleeve again, this time with less pretense, as though the simple act of touch had become her language. I felt the warmth of her skin through the fabric, and even when she pulled away, the ghost of it lingered. On my other side, the quieter woman shifted in her seat. Her knee edged closer until it almost touched mine. Not quite, just enough that I could feel the nearness, a faint heat radiating across the tiny sliver of space between us. Each accidental brush when we shifted felt intentional, even if neither of us admitted it. The air itself seemed thicker, charged. I could hear the faint rhythm of their breathing, matching my own. Every move felt magnified, the creak of a chair as one of them leaned forward, the soft scrape of a pen being set aside, the low murmur of a laugh that dissolved too quickly into silence. And beneath it all, my own pulse, faster than it should have been for something as simple as sitting between two classmates. Yet it wasn't simple. Not anymore. I tried to speak, to cut through the quiet with something ordinary, but the words faltered before I could form them. Instead, I found myself glancing at each of them in turn, catching the spark in one's playful eyes, then the calm intensity in the others. Both met my gaze differently, but with the same undeniable truth, they were aware of this tension too. It would have been easy to stand, to laugh it off, to break the moment with some excuse about needing to leave. But none of us moved. The world outside the classroom no longer seemed to exist. There was only the fading light, the faint closeness of their bodies, and the silence that held us together more tightly than words could. For the first time, I admitted to myself that I didn't want the moment to end. Even if it was fragile, even if it was uncertain, even if it couldn't last beyond these walls, I wanted to stay here, caught in this quiet, unbearable closeness. And as the shadows lengthened around us, I realized they wanted the same. The silence stretched so long it might have broken under its own weight. But instead of shattering, it softened. The room didn't feel tense anymore, it felt hushed, like something fragile had finally found its place. The quieter woman moved first. She turned slightly toward me, her hands uncurling from their folded rest on the desk. Then, with a steadiness that left no room for doubt, she reached out and let her fingers brush lightly against my wrist. It was the kind of touch that asked for nothing, soft, patient, almost reverent, yet it spoke volumes. Her fingertips lingered against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse beat fast and unsteady. She didn't press, didn't claim, just stayed there long enough for me to feel both the calm of her presence and the way she seemed to steady me without saying a word. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes lifting to mine. "For listening. Most people don't. They hear, but they don't really stay." Her words carried no accusation, no bitterness. Just quiet gratitude. And the truth of it made my chest ache in a way I couldn't quite name. Before I could answer, the bolder woman leaned in closer from my other side, unwilling to let the moment belong entirely to anyone else. She smiled faintly, her expression softer now, the teasing edge replaced with something more deliberate. "You are different," she murmured, her voice low enough that it seemed meant only for me. Then, with a gesture that felt almost startling in its intimacy, she lifted a hand and brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead. Her fingers skimmed gently across my temple, slow enough to leave a trail of warmth in their wake. It wasn't a playful move, not really. It was quiet, tender, the kind of gesture you'd only allow yourself if you wanted to be remembered for it. I sat still, caught between them. One touch anchoring me at the wrist, the other lingering just above my brow. My heart felt divided yet whole, as though I was standing at the center of something delicate that neither of us dared to name aloud. I swallowed, my voice almost failing me before I managed to speak. "I feel comfortable with you. Both of you. More than I expected." The admission hung there, unpolished but true. They exchanged a glance over me, not a look of rivalry, not sharp or possessive, but something quieter. An understanding. Perhaps even an agreement. Then, almost at the same time, they smiled. Not wide, not forced, just soft, knowing smiles that seemed to say, "We feel it too." The warmth of their closeness no longer felt like tension. It felt like promise. Not rushed, not demanded, but waiting. In that dimming classroom, with one hand grounding me and another brushing gently against my hair, I realized something had shifted forever. Eventually, the spell of the classroom had to break. The light outside had shifted to twilight, that pale in-between glow where the day hasn't quite given up, but night is already pressing close. The last traces of gold stretched thin across the floor, and the hum of the lights overhead seemed louder, reminding us that we had lingered far past when anyone else would have stayed. It was the bolder woman who rose first. She stretched slowly, her chair sliding back with a faint scrape. "We should go," she said, though her tone betrayed no real urgency. She looked down at me with that same half-smile, playful, but softened now, as though the earlier teasing had given way to something gentler. The quieter woman released my wrist only then, her hand sliding back slowly, almost reluctantly, as if she wanted me to feel the absence. She stood as well, gathering her notebook with practiced care, then glanced at me. "Come with us," she said simply. It wasn't a request. It was an inclusion. So I stood too. My bag felt strangely heavy against my shoulder, though I hardly noticed the weight. What I noticed was the nearness as we stepped out together, the three of us moving in unison, our footsteps echoing down the long hallway. The building was almost silent now. Doors closed, lights dimmed, only the faint glow of exit signs guiding us forward. Our laughter, quiet, occasional, unguarded, seemed to belong to the space, filling it where the usual chatter of the day had vanished. As we walked, small gestures carried more meaning than words. The bolder woman brushed against my shoulder deliberately, just enough to make me glance at her. She met my eyes for a second, then looked away with the faintest curve of a smile. On my other side, the quieter woman's arm nearly touched mine, the warmth of her presence steady, grounding. I could feel both of them, even in silence. Outside, the evening air wrapped around us, cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The world felt wide open compared to the hush of the classroom, but instead of scattering, we stayed close, walking as if the three of us were connected by some invisible thread. No one rushed to define what had just happened. No bold declarations, no nervous explanations. Just the simple comfort of walking side by side, each step an acknowledgement that something between us had shifted, and none of us wanted to step back from it. At the edge of the parking lot, we slowed, as though none of us quite wanted to say goodbye. The bolder woman gave a quiet laugh and shook her head. Strange how the end of class turned out to be the best part of the day. The quieter one didn't laugh, but she smiled, her eyes steady on mine. Some things are worth staying late for. I stood between them, warmed by both their words, and for once I didn't feel caught in the middle. I felt chosen, included, as though the three of us had agreed, silently, effortlessly, that this wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe, it helps me bring more age gap romance stories to life. And if you'd like to hear another one, let me know in the comments what kind of story you'd like next.